Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the session Amplifying Newcomer Voices During the Pandemic. My name is Yvonne Lai, and I'm a representative here of the team from the New Canadian Centre to welcome you to this presentation. We wanted to start off here to introduce my colleagues Lubna Sadek and Bisham Ramutar, and to also thank P2P for offering us the opportunity to present this workshop during their virtual workshop series in 2022. And also thanks to Sonali and the communications team at P2P for supporting us with this work today. So before we begin, I'd like to offer up a land acknowledgement. The New Canadian Centre is located on the Treaty 20 Michi-Saagiq territory and in the traditional territory of the Michi-Saagiq and Chippewa Nations, collectively known as the Williams Treaties First Nations, which include Curve Lake, Hiawatha, Alderville, Scugog Island, Rama, Beau Soleil, and Georgina Island First Nations. We respectfully acknowledge that the Williams Treaties First Nations are the stewards and caretakers of these lands and waters in perpetuity, and that they continue to maintain this responsibility to ensure their health and integrity for generations to come. We are all treaty people. So a brief introduction for you here today about the New Canadian Centre before we launch into the formal part of our presentation. So the New Canadian Centre was founded in 1979 with the onset of Vietnamese refugees coming to Canada because they were fleeing the communist regime there. So over the last 40 plus years, we've really dedicated our work to being a charitable organization that's supporting immigrants, refugees, and other newcomers in the Peterborough and Northumberland regions. So for those of us who are not joining us from Ontario, we're located in Ontario, and we are the only settlement agency between Ajax and Belleville in Ontario. So our mission is to empower people who are new to Canada so that they can be recognized and be valued members of Canadian society. And also we provide leadership to cultivate their meaningful economic, social, and cultural inclusion in our community. So a brief introduction to the work that the New Canadian Centre does. So as a settlement agency, our primary work is settlement and immigration support. And this involves what many of you know of as helping really all aspects of a newcomer who's settling into life in Canada, which includes working with important documents, working with registering for health services, etc. A big component of that is our youth support team through the Settlement Workers in Schools program, where we have staff who are working directly with families and youth in schools to support their integration into Peterborough and Northumberland. Big part of successful settlement is to find meaningful and sustainable employment, and that is what the workplace integration team is responsible for at the New Canadian Centre. We have staff who work with employment counselling as well as in skills development to help newcomers build those skills as they arrive in Canada. So in 2016, the New Canadian Centre was established as a welcome centre for government-assisted refugees, and that is when we began our resettlement assistance program. So since then, we have helped to resettle, say, over 400 government-assisted refugees from many countries, mainly from Syria and more recently in Afghanistan, but also from many other countries, including the Ivory Coast, Iraq, Iran, etc. The Community Connections program is a big mainstay and really much enjoyed, I would say, by many of our clients at the NCC. It involves social groups, which include the women's group, language groups, conversation groups that are facilitated by volunteers, and trips out into the community as well. And our final area of work is community development, close to my heart as this is part of my team. And this is where I would say we take our stories of transformation from clients out into the community to share through a very popular program that's been developed and that you'll hear about today called the Living Library Program. So that's combined with public outreach, engagement, and education. And that's, I think, a snapshot of what we do at the New Canadian Centre. Another big part of community development too is that we are a local immigration partnership. So the Peterborough Immigration Partnership has been established since 2009. And it's really an extensive partnership with many organizations and volunteers in the community towards a welcoming strategy for our community. So the agenda for today, as you'll see, is that colleagues and I will be sharing some stories of the work that we've been doing throughout the pandemic and that we hope to continue after the pandemic as well, and in the years to come. We'll start off with my colleague Basham Ramutar, who will share his presentation called This Is My Story, Building Bridges Through Storytelling. Basham is the Communications and Community Engagement Specialist at the New Canadian Centre. And that presentation will be followed by Lubna Sadiq, who is the youth worker at the New Canadian Centre. And her presentation is entitled Empowering Newcomer Youth as Community Leaders. And finally, I'll wrap up today with a presentation called Building Capacity for Newcomer Leadership. And finally, we'll launch into the question and answer session where I hope that many of you will jump in and share the questions that you have for all three of us. In the Q&A section. So you'll see a button on your Zoom webinar bar that says Q&A. So we'll leave all the questions to the end of the presentation, but please feel free to pop your questions into that section as you listen to the different presenters. And there's an ability also for you to upvote if you see that there's a question that you would have liked to ask but has already been put into the Q&A section, just to upvote that to make sure that that gets to the front of the queue. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Basham to share his presentation. This is my story, Building Bridges Through Storytelling.
Thank you so much, Yvonne, and thank you so much to everyone for joining us today and for this opportunity from P2P to share about the work that we do at the New Canadian Centre. A lot of the work that I do at the New Canadian Centre as the Communications and Community Engagement Specialist revolves around this idea of storytelling and sharing our stories in the community. There's a piece of my work that it involves actually communications work and sharing our story with the community through our social media platforms, our website, etc. But there's another part of the spectrum in my work that is about a community engagement, and the approach that we take in our work in community engagement and public education utilizes stories and storytelling. So I wanted to start by addressing the reason why we go to stories and why we begin with stories. And I wanted to share two quotes from two of our participants in two of the groups that you will hear today. So the first one is from Jorge Escalera, who's an 11-year-old boy who says that I learned that you should always tell your stories, even if you are shy. It helps you by laughing, and someone can learn something about your experiences. Jorge was a participant in our Newcomer radio group, as well as a participant in our Newcomer children's book project. And through these projects, he was able to reflect on his stories of being coming to Canada as a child and navigating and being involved in the school system and dealing with various topics like bullying as well in schools. And the other quote, it comes from a participant in our current storytelling circle that she shared with me just last week, that coming here each week and telling stories is my healing time. And so I wanted to start by saying that when we utilize stories in this work and when we provide platforms for individuals, for newcomers to share their stories, we are allowing them that exposure to be seen and to be heard and to think about their stories, but we're also allowing the community to learn those experiences, to learn about the experiences of newcomers. A lot of the work that we do in storytelling, as Yvonne mentioned, stems from our Living Library program, and all of the other projects that are on the screen are also stemmed as a result of the Living Library program. So the Living Library program was launched in 2018 in response to a need identified by the community. For a long time, we had often gotten requests from the community to hear the stories of newcomers and to invite newcomer speakers to attend their workplaces and their classrooms, etc. And we've always wanted to be able to support that and to have speakers go into places, but it also often means we have to go find an individual, ask them if they're interested, support them in feeling like they are able to tell their story and helping them in developing what that story is. And so it often meant that we would take a really long time in finding someone, and which often meant that we would have to say no sometimes to some requests. And so in 2018, we came up with this idea of creating a pool of speakers who might be available on a rotational basis us to share their story. And that's where the idea of the Living Library program came from. And since then, especially during the pandemic, it has grown into a multimodal storytelling and public education program. And it draws really heavily from the Human Library Organization in Denmark, which is an organization that has a number of individuals who are sharing their stories, and as they share their story, you can have a conversation with an individual, and as you're having that conversation, you're challenging myths and stereotypes about different people. And so we took that idea and we built a program around it that allowed for public education and individuals for public speaking opportunities. And so the aim of our program at the Living Library is to share human stories of immigration and integration by highlighting diverse and compelling stories of transition, settlement, and belonging. So we have featured speakers who are available through this program who have been trained in public speaking, and they are available to share their stories. And these stories are very diverse. And the reason for that is that we want to challenge the myth that there's a singular immigrant, that there's a singular immigration story and experience. And so we want to show the various aspects and various identities that are involved within the immigration experience. This program began as a public speaking opportunity and has grown since. And throughout the 3 years that we facilitated this program, the program has been free. So the community, we often get requests from classrooms, from schools, from churches, and other not-for-profit organizations for speakers that come in, and we offer the program for free to them. And we do pay the participants a small honorarium in appreciation for their time. Throughout the program for the last 3 years, we've had 15 speakers come through our program who've all been trained in public speaking. And together they've collectively spoken at over 50 times at various speaking engagements and a collective audience of over 1,100 people. And we have a couple more in the works coming up as well. And so, as I mentioned, this program initially started as a public speaking opportunity where you could book someone to come into your event to speak. However, in 2020, with the launch of COVID, we were no longer able to do in-person speaking engagements. And the year prior, we had done 22. And then the first year of COVID, we had only been able to facilitate 5 as a result of not being able to go into places in person. And in the early half of the pandemic in 2020, there wasn't as much interest in virtual visits as people were still building their capacity to transition to online platforms, et cetera. So there weren't as many requests for virtual visits, and so we thought that this was still a valuable program, and it was important that we share these stories and we provide these opportunities. So we shifted our focus, and we facilitated virtual visits when it was applicable and when it was when that opportunity was there. But we decided that we would shift our focus from in-person programming to podcasting. So each of our speakers were featured in a podcast episode. In season 1, there were 7 episodes, and in season 2, in 2021, last year, there were 5 episodes, which have collectively been listened to over 1,000 times. And so these are also available on our podcasting platforms on Apple, on Google, as well as Spotify, as well as on our website. And they're utilized in many capacities now. Oftentimes schools will utilize them in their teaching. We've had other organizations who have utilized them in various training programs that they have facilitated. So the ability to transition to this platform allowed us to really shift the program from strictly one mode to a multimodal version. And we've also been able to produce video series as well. And so these series as well, they're very short snippets of a person's story. They're just about 1.5 to 2 minutes long, and it provides a really quick introduction to a newcomer and their story. And they're utilized a lot within our schools. So we often get messages from schools, and they will show this in their classrooms, and then either themselves or myself will go into the classroom and have a conversation with the students about the videos and about what they've learned as a way of teaching children about the experiences of newcomers and immigrants. And so I share this to show that as horrible as the pandemic has been, and as much as it has forced us to change our programs and our services, it has also allowed us to really become innovative and to shift our programming into various aspects that have so much value for other other sectors of our work. And so I wanted to also share with you how we went about creating this program of the Living Library. And so we started in 2018 recruiting a very small number of speakers. And so we didn't place a call out publicly, but we went to our clients at the center who we knew a little bit about, and we knew a little bit about their interests and their stories. And we pitched this idea to them to see if they would be interested in sharing their story in the community. And so the first cycle of the program, there were 5 speakers. And each of those speakers were offered training. Some of them had been trained prior to the program, and some others were trained just before we launched the program. But we partnered with the Toastmasters Club in Peterborough to offer public speaking training. And so that training was a 5-week training where participants learned about how to create a speech, how to create presentations to go along with their speeches, and really build their capacity and their confidence to be able to speak publicly. And so they were offered that training, and then each of the speakers met with me individually for support with developing their story, reflecting on the aspects of their story and what they wanted to share. And some participants took the approach of sharing their life story, with the focus on their immigration, and others they focused specifically on a specific aspect of their story, like their experience going to schools here in Canada, or their experience raising a family here in Canada, as opposed to a review of their entire life or their entire experience here in Canada. And we gathered their bios, their headshots, their story titles, etc. And then we began to promote it, accepting requests from the community for public speaking engagements. And so these requests come directly through me as the program lead, and then I liaison with each of the speakers to see if they are interested and available. But essentially, organizations can go through the list of speakers and their bios and choose the one that they feel is most applicable to what they want to learn about, and then they can book that speaker to come in. Originally, when we launched the program, we were refreshing our featured speakers on every 5 to 6 months. And so the first 2 cycles of the program, we were doing that, but then we noticed that we were constantly having to go through this process of onboarding new individuals. And then within that 5 to 6 months, people were only speaking once or twice, perhaps. And so we now only do it on a yearly basis at the beginning of the year. That's when we will onboard new speakers and train new speakers for this program. And then once we had this structure in place, and then the pandemic hit, that's when we began to explore ways of growing the program, exploring avenues for radio and for video, et cetera. A lot of the speakers who are part of this program are also individuals who have an intermediate level of English. And so this program is also an experiential opportunity for them to practice and to learn English. And I've noticed that with many of our speakers over the course of the program, with every time they speak, their English grows and their confidence in their English grows. So it's really heartwarming and really wonderful to see that growth in them, and providing those opportunities where they could improve their English and their competence and their confidence in it. But it's also an opportunity for them to be seen and heard. And for many of them, it's their first time, not only public speaking, but it's also their first time that they have reflected on their stories of settling in Canada. For many of the people that we see at the NCC, we see them because there is a need that they have identified that they need help with. And so we're constantly supporting people through a need that they have. And so for a lot of them, they haven't stopped to actually think about how far they've come and about the experiences that they've had, the challenges they've overcome, the opportunities they've been given. And so when we recruit for people for this program, oftentimes for many of them, it's the first time that they've stopped and they've been given that space and that platform to reflect and to honor their growth and their experiences. But it's also an opportunity for the community to learn and for them to challenge stereotypes about immigrants and about newcomers. And for many of the organizations that we do go to speak to, for many of them, they have never heard about the New Canadian Centre as well. So it's also a really great outreach opportunity for us to share about the work that we do and to garner more support for our work. we have a lot of success with the Living Library program, but we wanted to ensure that we were providing these opportunities to a wider cross-section of people, including people who might not have the capacity right now to commit to joining the Living Library, but still want to have training and those opportunities in storytelling and public education, and so on. And so that's where this idea of the Newcomer Radio Group came from at the height of COVID in 2021. And so this is a quote from one of the participants that says that he's worn many shoes, but storyteller was never one of them. When I started, I wondered what I had to say. I soon discovered that I have a lot to share and that people want to listen. This program gave me the confidence to learn and use these skills. And within the Newcomer Radio Group, we partnered with a local radio station called Trent Radio, which is a community radio station. And this program was facilitated entirely through Zoom. Our goal was to support newcomers with skills and opportunities to tell their stories on their own terms, and by doing so to diversify voices and perspectives in local media and arts. There were 2 cohorts of the group facilitated in winter and spring of 2021, and each participant was given audio gear, including a professional recorder and headphones, which was theirs to keep. And as part of this program, participants received training both in storytelling and in reflecting on their story, as well as technical skills training in audio production, in radio production, in editing, etc. And this program has been widely successful, and we've gotten people after receiving the training, people put their skills to test by producing a segment for radio, which was broadcasted on Trent Radio, as well as on our podcasting platforms online, which again have been utilized by classrooms, etc. And we get a range of stories being told here through this program. For this year, we are taking a slightly different approach to this group, this group is currently ongoing right now, which is the Storytelling Circle, and it's a partnership with a local theater studio called Theatre for Good, and this version is being offered in person. It's a 6-week program focusing on storytelling through arts-based approaches. So participants are engaged in using their body, and using their words, and using their movements to tell their story, as well as to reflect on their story. And at the conclusion of this program, each of the participants will tell their stories or a story through an art-based medium of their choosing that they've been introduced to through this program. You will notice that for each of these programs, they are very heavily focused on their experiences of adults. Although there have been some children involved in the program, it's been heavily focused on the experiences of adults. But we also wanted to ensure that we were capturing the stories of children and newcomer children, because myself, as a newcomer child, I know that the way that children navigate the immigration experience is very different from the experiences of parents and of adults. And so we wanted to ensure that we were also sharing those stories of children and ensuring that their narratives and their stories were told. And so we came up with this idea for a children's book, and which is called Building a Home. And so Building a Home is a children's book that takes us on the journeys of 6 newcomer children who are now living, playing, and going to school in Peterborough. And it's written and illustrated by Cassandra Lee, who herself is an immigrant. She just came to Canada about 3 years ago from the United States. And she's a professional artist, illustrator, as well as an educator. And we commissioned her to produce a book for us about the experiences of newcomer children. And so the book is suitable for ages 5 to 12, but it can also be utilized for children younger than 5, but with guidance from an adult or an educator. With this book, Cassandra worked with a group of 6 children who come from Syria, Kazakhstan, Mexico, and Pakistan, but are now living here. And they range in ages 6 to 12 years old and have been here in Canada for anywhere between 6 months to 6 years. So there's quite a diversity in the experiences and the length of time that they have been here in Canada. And through this program, there were 5 phases to this program. So the first phase was the research and development phase, which ran from September to November 2020, in which we did a literature review. We did research on children's books that center on Canadian immigration stories. We came up with we researched some best practices in writing and sharing children's books, and then we engaged in a contract development with our speaker. with our facilitator Cassandra, to ensure that we were capturing all of the things that were relevant for this book, to ensure that we were considering all of the avenues. And then we began participant recruitment based on our clients at the New Canadian Centre. So we went to our settlement staff and our youth staff to ask them for potential individuals who might be willing to participate in this program, who fit the bill of ages 6 to 12. And then we also spent some time during this period of time developing what the sessions would look like. And ultimately we decided on 5 sessions over the course of 5 weeks, individually with each child. And each of these sessions were facilitated online, where the materials were delivered to the children so that they could have them and then they could work online with Cassandra. And then our final session was held in person as well. And then during this period of time, we were also applying for a grant through the United Way of Peterborough, which we did end up getting, which allowed us to print the book and distribute a few copies for free. In phase 2 of the project, running from November and December, that's when we were actually facilitating the project and developing the content of the book. And so we were doing the one-on-one art-based sessions with the child, where they were engaged in art to tell their story, as well as conversation to share about their story, and to see some of the artwork that the children produced to share about aspects of their immigration story, along with the conversations to illuminate the story. And then at the end of those sessions, we reviewed the data and we reviewed the overarching themes, and then developed our story. We were engaged in a story development on a narrative to tell the story. And phase 3 of the project, running from January until the end of July, we were actually designing and testing the book. So the first 4 months, we were developing the story and we were illustrating it. And each of the pages in the book and each of the experiences documented in the book actually come from something the children told us. So there isn't a particular experience in the book that is new. These are all things that children have told us about their stories. There were 2 drafts of the book produced, and the second draft went to testing. And so we tested it with each of the participants to get their interpretation and to ensure that the parts of the book reflecting their story were accurate. And we also tested it with other newcomer families as well, to ensure that it was also representative and reflective of their experiences as newcomers. And the book was also tested with teachers and early childhood educators to ensure that it was a book that could be utilized in classrooms. And then finally with individuals from the community who are connected to our work, to ensure that it was a book that would share the experiences of newcomers in a meaningful way. In phase 4 of the project, from August until the end of fall, we were engaged in translating the book. So the book is available in 6 other languages in addition to English. And then we were designing the book into those different languages. Our launch was held at the end of September. And then once that happened, we began taking pre-orders for the book throughout the fall. And so the grant that we received from the United Way allowed us to print up to 500 copies of the book, which were given out for free within the community. In phase 5 of the book was being distributed to those people who pre-ordered, and there were 490 people who pre-ordered a copy of the book. And so these books have gone to newcomers. They've gone to members within the community. Each school within the Peterborough school boards have also received a book. So that's roughly about 130 schools in Peterborough have received the book for their libraries, as well as child and family centers and community centers as well. And we're currently on a speaking tour going into classrooms to share the story of this book. In the coming, at the end of this week, the book will also be available for available for sale. And so the book is available exclusively at a partner location, Watson and Lou, who's a distributor of local goods in Peterborough. And the book is available for purchase across Canada through the website watsonandlou.ca. And the book will be available beginning on Thursday. The book is only available for sale in English, but it is available online as a resource in 7 languages: Arabic, Bengali, Chinese, English, French, Korean, and Spanish, available for free on our website, nccpeterborough.ca/building a home. And so with that, I want to say thank you so much for giving me this platform to share about this. And I welcome questions at the end about any of these projects and about how you can implement these projects at your agencies. These were all projects that we built from resources that we already had, and then we applied for other sources of funding to supplement it. But these were all things that we were able to build from resources that we have and from staff members already here at the NCC to facilitate these programs. And so I look forward to your questions at the end. And for now, I will pass it over to Lubna, who will share about her programs with youth.
Thank you, Bashan, for that lovely presentation. And hello, everyone. It's lovely to be here. And thank you so much for your time. So my name is Lubna. I'm the youth worker at the New Canadian Centre. And today I'd like to discuss how we amplify newcomer voices during the pandemic through empowering newcomer youth as community leaders. As the youth worker at the New Canadian Centre, my role includes creating and facilitating events and activities around recreation, employment, and education. But today I'd like to focus on a program on our Newcomer Leadership Group called the New Canadian Centre's Young Leaders, also known as NCCYL. And today I'd just like to offer what is NCCYL, how did we go about creating NCCYL, why create such a group, and what are the outcomes that we had in creating NCCYL. So this is the NCCYL guidelines that I discuss with the youth at the start of our every meeting so that they're all on the same page on what this is and why they're there. So NCCYL is a youth-led council of youth with newcomer experience in Peterborough, Nogojiwanong. The members of NCCYL lead discussions and projects and advocate for themselves and other newcomer youth with the guidance and resources of the New Canadian Centre. So they very much lead their own discussions at our meetings, and I'm there to help guide them. NCCYL's goal is to help other newcomer youth and help them feel welcome in their community whilst gaining leadership skills in the process. And they will achieve this goal by creating meaningful experiences through projects for newcomer youth to engage with the community and integrate in Canadian culture whilst holding pride in their own background and culture. So how did we go about creating this group? We started this in September 2020. So just when the pandemic was, taking up our lives, we recruited youth through social media call outs and through word of mouth. And we reached out to youth who have previously reached out to us at the New Canadian Centre, wanting to volunteer with us in an ongoing way. So we made this call out, and then we had informal interviews with them to make sure that they meet the requirements. They needed to be high school students in Peterborough, Nogojiwanong with newcomer experience. And when we say newcomer experience here, we wanted to create an inclusive term of youth with newcomer experience. Many of our newcomer youth arrived to Canada, let's say in the last 5 years, but there are some other youth that were interested in participating that have newcomer experience. Maybe they moved to Canada when they were only 1 or 2 to immigrant parents, but they grew up in a household perhaps speaking another language, and they were still in touch with their roots, and they saw perhaps the struggles that their parents had in immigrating to Canada, and so they wanted to participate in this and help out as well. So as long as you had that newcomer experience and you were a high school student, you met the criteria. Of course, because we started this in 2020, the platform was only virtual. So we met virtually once a week for 2 hours. And we wanted to create a team. So how we did this is we, in the end, had 6 members with newcomer experience. We created this team because they were all shy. They went to different schools. They weren't really sure what they were getting themselves into. They just knew that they wanted to help other newcomers because of their experiences. And so they joined this, this group. Our discussions led to organic conversations on important issues, which was very beneficial for the youth and for us as an organization to hear from them, because it's hard to invite youth and say, hey, come to a conversation where we can talk about discrimination or how you feel. But having this weekly consistent meeting just brought those conversations up organically. These conversations led to them having projects. So the purpose was that we wanted them to lead the projects. We wanted the youth to choose what projects they felt would benefit the community, would benefit other newcomer youth, and they would run it and they would do everything. So the projects that the first cohort of the NCCYL were the virtual hangouts, homework help group, and the NCCYL Guidebook. So just going into that a bit more in depth, they created a virtual hangout because they felt like other newcomer youth may have been isolated in the pandemic, and so they wanted to invite all newcomer youth to just hang out with them and play games online. No one attended, and this was probably due to some advertising issues, as well as the youth, upon our debriefing, felt like other youth didn't want to engage virtually. At this point in the pandemic, school was completely online. All other activities and clubs were canceled. So they felt like youth probably didn't want to engage further online. So they decided to create a homework help group instead that was also run virtually, because they felt like newcomer youth probably need some extra help with homework. So they volunteered to peer tutor, and this was quite successful. And a lot of the newcomer youth felt that this opportunity was particularly valuable because they could directly see the impact they were making. At the start of the session, this person needed help with their homework, they didn't understand. And then by the end, they were able to see that this person was, doing better. Finally, because of the unsuccessful virtual hangout, NCCYL focused on creating an NCCYL guidebook. It was a resource for newcomer youth that is circulated virtually and created in print. They felt like since youth maybe didn't want to come and engage virtually in a conversation, that they would offer some resources from experiences, tips on integrating into Canada, and things that you might want to know as a newcomer youth. And so they created this guidebook themselves with all of the tips and experiences that they wanted to share. And they presented to both public and Catholic school boards to get approval of circulating this at schools and get permission to distribute this at schools for free to students. And this is just a sneak peek on what the new Canadian Centre's Young Leaders Guidebook looks like. The first page includes art by the students, or by newcomer students through an international night that they had at one of the high schools. They created Bitmojis of themselves so that they can be in the guidebook without particularly posting their own photos. And as you can see, they created QR codes so that they can create a short guidebook, but having QR codes that lead to other pages online that further expand on what is already on these pages. And this is just a bit more like Canadian culture, the do's and don'ts in Canada, some cultural differences that they experienced themselves that they learned over time when they arrived to Canada. So, and these are the authors, the New Canadian Centre's Young Leaders from our first cohort. Our second cohort is still in process. We began in September 2021, and there are a few differences between the first and second cohort. Recruitment was done the same, social media callouts and by word of mouth. However, the informal interviews done with the incoming NCCYL members were conducted by the previous outgoing NCCYL members so they can get that interview experience. And luckily, we were able to meet in person to start. So our team building activities were much more engaging. The team really bonded much more quickly than the first cohort because we were able to meet in person. But of course, we did have to adapt whenever COVID restrictions changed. And this is when we could really see the difference between virtual and in person. The previous cohort was all virtual. So they really had to try their best to engage. However, with this, we found it much more beneficial to have an in-person. And our team, another difference in the second cohort is that these youth also wanted to take on roles. So they expressed that they would like to take on roles. So we discussed their skill sets that they had and skill sets that they wanted to develop. And then they volunteered in the roles that they wanted to pursue on the council based on the skill sets they wanted to develop, such as president, media coordinator, treasurer, etc. The projects that this cohort decided they wanted to run was a virtual hangout as well during the lockdown that we had earlier this year, and that was quite well attended. During our debrief, the youth felt that perhaps they're all used to it at this point, and they're used to having attending virtual, and school was in person at this time, so attending a virtual hangout event was not as taxing. Finally, they also created the Nccyl show. So in collaboration with Trent Radio, the community radio station that Bisham mentioned, they received training on how to record and create a radio show. It is being aired on Trent Radio at CFFF 92.7 FM the last Monday of every month at 6:30 p.m. And then it is published later on Spotify as a podcast to be listened to later on. They're running an in-person arcade night this Friday, inviting youth to come to an arcade. Some of our newcomer youth have never been to one, and they wanted to just have a fun night. And they're also gaining experience on event planning and budgeting through this event. And finally, they're working on policies and procedures. They felt that this is a valuable council, and they'd like to create rules for themselves to follow, as well as for future NCCYL members to follow. So why did we create such a group? As part of the New Canadian Centre's strategic plan of every year, we have some goals that we like to achieve with our clients. And so we wanted to create an opportunity where our youth can gain leadership skills. And we wanted to empower them by creating a platform to build rather than attend. As part of my work, I'm just talking to youth and getting them to come to a bunch of events that can be helpful for them. But again, they're events that we as adults create. They're very structured, and oftentimes we believe that the youth will like it. But we wanted to create an opportunity where the youth can decide what they want, and we can empower them to create it. They run the event, but I'm just there to ask the right questions, guide them in the discussion, help them refocus if their discussion goes a bit too off topic. So it is very much youth-led, and that's something that that's a goal that we had, and we wanted to help our youth achieve that. We also wanted to create a space where they can learn and practice self-advocacy and advocating for others, which is, just builds on the first 2 points of gaining leadership skills and having a platform that they built themselves. And it also serves as a needs assessment for us through these discussions that we have with the youth. Through their experiences, we're able to hear more from them on what they're experiencing, what their needs are, and how we can support them in other ways. And we found that through having our first 2 cohorts of NCCYL, as my colleague Bisham mentioned, building something from the ground up, it seemed intimidating at first. We had no idea how many youth would be interested, how this would go. how beneficial it would be, what were the projects that they would want to run, would we be able to achieve them? But we just went for it anyways, and it was successful, and it's evolving as a youth-led project, and it's becoming what it is because of the work of the youth and because they determined what NCCYL is and is becoming. And so it's through this program that we hope that we're amplifying the newcomer voices by giving them a platform where they feel safe, confident, and heard. And some of the youth that, during our exit interviews, all of them mentioned that this was an opportunity that they found valuable because A, during the pandemic, a lot of their clubs and groups were canceled, and B, they just didn't realize that they had the opportunity to be heard, that they wanted to be heard by adults. They mentioned this especially during board meeting presentations when, they all felt like we're just high school students. Why would our principal listen to us? But it was the case. They didn't realize that that we want to hear them and that they can use their voice to share their experiences and what they want to see done. So thank you so much for listening. I hope that there was something you can take away from creating a project like this. And please feel free to reach out to us and connect with us using this information. I will now pass it on to Yvonne, where she can talk a bit more about the Newcomer Leadership Group for adults. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lubna and Visham. And I will now share my screen. Final presentation for this workshop session, and it is on building capacity for newcomer leadership. So many of the themes that you've heard so far from Lubna and Visham's presentation, I think you will see echoed in the work that I've been doing with the Newcomer Leadership Group. And coincidentally, all of this work took place around the same period of time, really. So the agenda for my presentation is to share with you the progression of the developing of the work of the Newcomer Leadership Group, how we designed it, how it was implemented, looking at outcomes, and then sharing some of the lessons that I have learned. So the why. So Lubna ended with the why, referring back to the strategic plan for the New Canadian Centre, and I'll refer to our commitment to anti-racism through our anti-racism statement that we developed as an organization. And essentially, it is grounded in the fact that we want to be able to help newcomers to feel that they belong, because to belong is to be able to have hope, to build confidence, to gain strength, to heal from trauma, and to be able to lift others up and create community. So we ended our anti-racism commitment with some actual action items that we wanted to see in the years to come. And one of these was to help newcomers and refugees to navigate opportunities to be leaders in the community. And I think you'll see through Lubna's work with NCCYL, as well as with empowering newcomers to become public speakers to share their story, that work is also carrying on. So for the Newcomer Leadership Group, what we wanted to do was that we wanted to first envision what a Newcomer Leadership Group would be like. We've never done that before. And again, the same theme of building from the ground up. So we worked with a local consultants agency, a Rising Collective. First, invite them to facilitate a visioning session of what could this training look like. So I recruited 10 participants from a range of immigration pathways. So there were those who were had attained their Canadian citizenship already, those who were permanent residents, those who are here in Canada as international students. And the questions that we posed to them was, what kind of a group do you see this becoming? How should we recruit for members? How long should this training be? What should we discuss in the training? And how should we follow up in a meaningful way? So the first group was then launched in March 2021. And we advertised it as a group that was providing support to newcomers who are looking to engage as volunteers and participate in spaces where decisions were being made in the Peterborough Nova Scotia community. and also that this was a group that would expand the capacity for community organizations to include and integrate diverse perspectives in their practice. So often in my work, what I get is calls for volunteers to join boards or committees from different organizations in our community, inviting newcomers into those spaces. So what we wanted to do in this program was to make sure that leaders from those organizations were invited into this space to be able to share and to create a welcoming environment as a guest speaker. So the first group was then developed after that visioning session. The facilitators were the two consultants from Arising Collective, as well as myself. Everything took place on Zoom, and it was an 8-week session that lasted between an hour and a half to 2 hours at each time, and there were 10 participants. The recruitment for the group, interestingly, became by invitation only. We wanted to make sure that those who participate in the visioning session had first dibs, in a sense, to be able to join a group that they had helped to design. And pretty much between 8 or 9 of them decided, yes, that this was something that they had the time to be able to commit to. And really, they've all had some form of community engagement experience already. So these were the 8 topics that we landed on for our pilot group. So we always started off with an introduction to what participants could expect through the 8-week training. And then going on to storytelling and building confidence in public speaking. They learned about what different boards could do through board governance, how to chair and facilitate an effective meeting, how to interpret a financial report, really just the basics of looking at a financial statement and what it meant. They learned about how to build healthy relationships between staff, being on a committee and on a board. Session 7 was a panel discussion where we invited 3 guests to share their experience, and session 8 was a wrap-up and reflection on their journey thus far. So this group also developed a group project, and we devoted time to each session for them to discuss what it was that they wanted to do as a group project. And they landed on wanting to develop a Facebook group, develop and moderate a Facebook group for newcomers to Peterborough. So this is the description that you see here that they crafted. The logo was designed by the group. The rules of the group were also designed by the groups themselves. So I just wanted to read out this last part here. It says, we definitely don't have all the answers, but our goal is to create a network for newcomers from all walks of life to communicate, make new friends, ask for tips, understand, and engage more in our community. Newcomers, you are not alone. We welcome you. So this group, if you would like to search on Facebook, is still active. It's called Newcomers in Peterborough. So some highlights from this pilot session. It was quite consistent after I met with them one-on-one after the session, that all of them expressed that they didn't actually know what they had signed up for, but that they had confidence in the New Canadian Centre to be designing a group that would develop their capacity in some way. There was a lot of trust in the process and in the outcomes as well. In this group, even though it was a virtual group, all participants had their cameras on for all the sessions. Another highlight of the group was that there was a really deep sense of community that was built as a peer cohort. And I characterize this by tears as well as celebration. So at the end of the first group, after reflecting with the participants one-on-one and also with the consultants, we came up with a list of stop, start, and continue items. So at each session, we actually invited a guest from the community who would start off the session by sharing their experience. So participants said, we don't really want to hear about general experiences. If it's on that particular topic, for example, about storytelling, could the guests come and share their experiences related to that particular topic? They wanted to hear more from guests who didn't come from privilege, and they kind of explained it in a way that, you know, our journey is hard, and we'd like to hear how other people overcame those barriers to engagement in order to feel inspired themselves. They also wanted us to stop the push towards board work, so joining an organization as a board director. To them, this was a very high level of engagement that they really just were not comfortable with at that point in time. So more things to start. They wanted to learn more about different levels of government and how to advocate at different levels. They, of course, wanted to meet in person, and they suggested that meetings be on a rotating basis hosted by the organization that the guest speaker is from. They suggested making it an open recruitment call so that more people could be able to access this amazing opportunity, and that they wanted us to think about just providing 2 to 3 options for a group project rather than to let them have a free discussion, because that took up a lot of time to design. They wanted us to continue having breakout rooms where they could have more intimate discussions with their peers in a smaller group. And they really, really liked the fact that they were building relationships together as a cohort and moving forward. So we took all these suggestions and decided that we would run another group in the fall of 2021. The partnership worked really well with the Rising Collective and our staff, so we continued with that. With pandemic restrictions and because of meeting times in the evening on a Wednesday, we decided to carry on with Zoom. This time we decided to switch things on a little bit and introduce some adults who were relatively new to the community. We thought that there might be a benefit for them to learn about the community network and help them to engage and settle a bit more easily. So we kept it at 8 weeks and about 1.5 to 2 hours per session, and kept the group small at about 10. There was a slight change to the topics. Okay, so we took out the sessions related to board governance and reading financial statements as suggested by the participants, and labeled a new session called Leadership Competency. So looking at different leadership styles, what does it mean to be a leader? Who do you consider to be a leader, and why do you consider the person to be a leader for you? We also wanted to introduce the topic of reconciliation. So session 6 was a session that was entirely devoted to sharing a little bit about the Indigenous history and culture of our area, and asking our participants to reflect on their roles in reconciliation. So the group project, we provided 2 options, and the participants decided to pursue the option, which was to create a meal outreach kit, a sandwich kit for a local organization that was supporting people who are experiencing homelessness. So they got together to do that. So the highlights from this session, again, what have I signed up for? So one-to-one, every participant said, I didn't really know what I signed up for, but I really trust the NCC to do what is best, and I'm really glad that I signed up for it. In contrast, this time, we only had 20% of participants who had their cameras on consistently. There were more international students who were in this group, and as a result, they missed quite a few sessions when there were more assignments or when there was an exam that was scheduled in the busy weeks. In overall, the consultants suggested that there might have been less cohesion with the group because of these 2 factors. And there also was lower commitment to the group project. So it wasn't 100% of the group that actually attended the sandwich making session. So the stop, start, and continue for this group. So we decided that it might not be a good idea to recruit participants who are really focused on the basics of settlement. So there were participants who were in the process of looking for stable housing and employment, and just were not that focused on volunteering at that point in time. This session, we also had participants from different municipalities. So we have a broad catchment area and included some participants from Northumberland. And that made it difficult to share community resources. So the suggestion was that for the next session to really just focus on Peterborough or Northumberland. Everybody wanted to meet in person. Everybody thought that an open recruitment call was a good thing. And also to provide maybe some placement or internship opportunities at organizations that they might be interested in. And same as before, breakout rooms were very popular, as well as this cohort-based approach. So that led to our 3rd session this January, where we continued this partnership with the Rising Collective on Zoom, looking at adults in Peterborough. We placed an open call this time on social media and asked for folks to sign up with a very general description of what the group was to be. We decided to shrink the group down duration from 8 weeks to 6 weeks with changes to the topics, just to hope that the material was going to be presented in a tighter way and that we would have less absences. So these were the topics that we did in January: an introduction to the community, and then civic and community engagement, so that they would learn about different levels of government and what they could advocate for at different levels of government, leadership and personal motivation. And we called this understanding your why. And then telling my story, where they learned how to craft an elevator pitch. Building personal networks was a new session as well, where we introduced a kind of speed dating session where we had 3 guests, divided the group up into groups of 2 or 3 people, who then rotated between the rooms where the guests were to deliver the elevator pitch and to get some feedback on the pitch. Really an introduction, how they would quickly introduce themselves to someone else in the community, and then a wrap-up session. In this session, what we didn't do was to give them a group project. Instead, the group project morphed into where we asked participants to deliver the land acknowledgement at each session. So at the very first session, there was a very basic introduction to what a land acknowledgement was. And then we left it to participants who were divided into pairs or into groups of 3 to really have a discussion and a conversation and reflection, and then to present their reflections to the group. So what we saw was that the first few groups presented more of a standard land acknowledgement, where it was something that was maybe something like I had presented earlier on in this session. As the session progressed from sessions 1 to 6, the land acknowledgement actually ended up taking between 30 and 45 minutes in some cases, because the participants were actually so engaged in their discussions that they really wanted to present what they reflected before they delivered the land acknowledgement. So highlights for the final session that we had in January. Again, what have I signed up for? Again, lots of trust in the New Canadian Centre to do this. We had more breakout rooms in this session. Everybody had their cameras on all the time. There was really strong cohesion. There was strong commitment to what we called the group project, in the sense of the delivery of the land acknowledgement. And then we had many participants who ended up suggesting resources to each other. So stop, start, and continue looking forward for us is 1 session per fiscal year instead of 2. There's quite a lot of resources that are devoted. Once we run 2 sessions, we want to make sure that we run a good session with 1. We'd like to try and meet in person and maybe increase the group size, because if we are delivering more material and then breaking people up into breakout rooms, it actually gives them the opportunity to meet more people. We'd like to continue with an open recruitment call, a cohort-based approach, and really the land acknowledgement exercise became a very meaningful one. So some unexpected outcomes were the friendships and relationships that were developed between participants in the group. So this is a photo from group 1, where 2 of the participants in the group ended up leading a community art project and invited the other participants in the group to come and actually paint hello or welcome in their language on this road mural. So participants were then matched 1-to-1 based on their interests after their participation in the group. So they would have a chat with me and then express what areas that they would like to learn more about to volunteer in. That was a list of organizations that participants were matched to. We also asked that participants share a photo and a bio on the New Canadian Centre website. And we asked them to write their bio in the sense of, what story do you want to share with our community about yourself? And there was no format, and they all wrote a bio that was meaningful to them. They all got a letter from the New Canadian Centre that stated what they ended up engaging in for the duration of the training, that they could then add to their portfolio or share with an organization that they wanted to volunteer with, and the one-to-one meetings, as I had talked about before. All right, so some lessons learned: that saying yes for the participants was a very big first step, and that actually was a big enabler of their confidence. In terms of getting feedback, it was really important for staff to get feedback in terms of the initial design at the start, after every meeting, and at the very end of that session. We also discovered that we have a very welcoming community that's very willing to help, and that it was actually really inspiring for past participants to come back to sessions to share their experiences as presenters. Understanding their personal values was really key to them committing to all the sessions, and that in terms of the on the delivery end, we really had to strike a balance between delivering content and encouraging discussion and conversation. And when that happened in the third session, we really saw a really strong commitment to carrying on that work after the duration of the group. So for the next steps, we'd like to establish a Newcomer advisory table as part of the Peterborough Immigration Partnership. And we thought that the participants from these groups would be really good as our first pilot Newcomer advisory table to join. So I believe that is the end of my presentation. Please feel free to contact us. And at this point in time, I'm going to stop sharing the screen and also invite you to pop questions into the Q&A section of Feedloop here. And I know we already have some questions, so I'll invite all my colleagues to turn the cameras back on so that we can answer some of these questions. Thank you very much for doing that. For those who've popped their questions in already, please feel free to carry on doing that. So the first question, what was the total budget for this program, recruitment, training, and speaker fees, etc.? So I'm going to direct that to Visham because I think that came in during your presentation. So Visham, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I would say that our budget changes every year depending on the activities that we're doing with the Living Library, but on average, the trainings, each cycle of the training costs about $500, and that's a training that we do in partnership with the Peterborough Toastmasters Club. And so for that five-week training, it's about $500 for an average about for 5 weeks for 5 participants. In terms of the honorary that we paid the participants, on average, it's about $500 per cycle of the program. And we also cover for speakers who do not drive, we also covered their travel. And so usually for many of the speakers, they do drive on their own, but for the ones that we don't, we do provide travel for them. And on average, it's about $300 per year. And then in terms of expanding the program beyond the public speaking engagements, when we do our Living Library podcast series, the podcast is produced in partnership with the local radio station, Trent Radio. And then we pay contract Trent Radio to produce that series for us. And it's about $1,000 per season. And similarly, when we produce our video series as well, it's about $1,000 total spent for the videos that we have produced so far. So and there's another question here as well, if you don't mind me jumping to that, Yvonne, about are these types of programs being incentivized in other regions? There isn't pocket money or grant that I've come across for programs like this, but the funds that we utilize to pay for this are coming directly from the funding that we receive through IRCC and through other partners, and so we were utilizing them as part of our ongoing outreach and promotion budgets as well there, but we haven't come across anything specifically to fund programs like this, and I haven't also come across programs like this in other regions in the work that I've done. But do you want to add anything about that one, Yvonne or Lubna?
I don't, but maybe it's a good opportunity to invite Lubna to share a bit about the budget for NCCYL as well, so that our guests have a chance to learn about that.
For sure, yeah. So originally we didn't have a budget for NCCYL at all. We had some budget for like purchasing. Well, first the first cohort was solely online. So normally when we'd have budget for like food at meetings or for activities or running events, we didn't have anything for this. But for our second cohort, we thought that because we were moving more in person, we had a budget of $1,000 for the year. So this is covering the costs of any events that the youth would run. And yeah, so far we've spent about 600 on an event. So we still have 400 left. The only thing is that for the first cohort, we took $500 from another pot of money that we had to print the guidebooks to distribute at schools. So between 500 and 1,000 per year seems to be the case, and a bit over that if you are going, like we're offering food at our meetings now and so on and so forth. That's about $20 a week, but we again have a different budget for that for youth, like food for youth activities. So it really depends. Yeah.
Thanks, Labna. And then I'll just add for the Newcomer Leadership Groups, it's about 3,200 per session, and it involves, that's mainly the time for the two consultants to be facilitating the group. So one is usually a facilitator and one is a note taker, and they end up running all the feedback as well. All right, we'll go on to another question here, and I think this goes back to Basham as well. I love the activities that you have done around the living library. Have you done any evaluation of whether these activities are influencing the attitudes of established Canadians towards immigrants?
I really like this question, and I think that's a really great thing for us to do more intentionally in the work that we've done, but we haven't done any sort of overall evaluation of the program and of the people. But after each of the sessions, there is an evaluation that we present to the persons inviting us to speak for their feedback. And so from that, we're learning about where they were before coming to this program, and hearing the speaker how much they knew about immigration and newcomer experiences, and the things that they've learned as a result of it, as well as things that we should improve on, or recommendations. And so we are able to get evaluation as through that mechanism that helps us in terms of developing, being more intentional about the way that we deliver the program. But we haven't quite delved into assessing the outcomes, or how it's influencing Canadians and attitudes towards newcomers. But I think that's a really great thing for us to be looking at for the future. So thank you for that suggestion. Definitely.
Thanks, Basham. Lavna, did you have anything you wanted to add? No, that's great. For the person maybe who asked the question, or any other guests on this call, if you would like to share, if this is something that you have done in your organization or in your area, how you've conducted the survey, please feel free to get in touch with us. It'd be lovely to see how that's been done. All right, so for the last question that I have here, for all presenters, what is your best tip for initial recruitment of participants starting from an audience of 0? Lavna, would you like to take that question first?
Sure. So my suggestion, depending on the context of this question, would be to call people directly if you have an idea of who you want to recruit for your program. You know, to add a face to the name, if you just do a social media call out, some people are intimidated to, or some people just don't read all of the details on a social media post sometimes. So calling people directly is always a great way. Sending voice notes on WhatsApp or text message, and kind of just reaching out to people, introducing yourself and why they should join, and just creating that connection one-on-one. We also find it helpful to contact partner organizations or organizations that you're familiar with and ask for referrals from their clients or people that they know. So it just depends on who you're trying to recruit and for what. But definitely, like social media is the first place I would start, but it's not the best way to create an interaction if you have 0 people following you on social media, for instance, or you're just not sure. Reaching out to people and contacting partner organizations for referrals would be my suggestion.
Thanks, Lavna. Basham, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I would say that for me, the thing that I've learned, the lesson that I've learned most about this is ensuring that participants know exactly what they're signing up for and know exactly what they should expect. The first versions of some of these programs that I run, and a lot because these are unique programs that you're not necessarily going to always hear about, and so they're also introducing things that people are new for people. And so the greatest thing that I've learned is to ensure that participants know exactly what it is that they're signing up for. So usually when someone writes in or calls me to inquire, what we've learned to do is have a separate sheet that goes in depth into everything, outlines what each week is gonna cover, outlines the expectations that we have for this program, the outcomes. So if we were asking them to produce something like a radio segment, etc., so ensuring that they understand all of that. And when it came to the children's book, the best approach that we found was having having an individual meeting with each partner, with each participant, the children and their parents, going over the project, going over how we wanted to do that, and then having all of that information be available in their language as well, so that they can fully understand it in their first language as well, and then signing off on a consent form. So that really helped. Once we were implementing that, helped with people not showing up, etc., or dropping out because it wasn't what they were looking for. So definitely ensuring that you're sharing all the relevant information with people.
Thanks, Prashant. So maybe I'll add for the program that I run, it's a very short program. So we make sure that upfront all the different session titles were shared with participants, as well as the objectives, as well as how much time they would be expected to commit to it. I would say, though, leadership is quite an amorphous concept, and it could mean different things to different people. So I think what worked, I think, really well for my program was that there were people that were constantly or consistently attending other NCC activities already. That really just, you could see they wanted to do more, and they just maybe wanted just that extra opportunity to do a bit more, and to make sure that they had information about programs like this that they could participate in. That one-to-one outreach to them really made a difference for me. All right, we have maybe our last question here from Jessica. Jessica asks, how are language barriers addressed during these programs?
Sure. Yeah. So for me, unfortunately, with the programs that I run, it doesn't really lend itself to having absolute beginners or people who are beginner, unfortunately. So a lot of the programs that I run with the Living Library and storytelling programs and the children's book, they were all for individuals who have intermediate level of English or advanced or as well. But unfortunately, for a lot of those programs, because it's so the art of storytelling is so intimate that it's harder to communicate without speaking intermediate level of English. So we for those programs, it's an intermediate, but we have been talking about creating a special group for just beginner level, where we could provide interpretation if it was a dominant language. For instance, if it was an Arabic only group, then we could provide interpretation for that. But I think it also changes the way that the group functions and the dynamics as well if you're providing interpretation. So for my groups, it's mostly in intermediate levels.
Yeah, just to echo what Bisham has said, for NCCYL, it was for youth that are proficient in English. So we didn't really have any language barriers with that. I know that at NCC, we try to bring down any language barriers with our resources. So with Bisham's, with the Building a Home book, it was published in various languages. One of NCCYL's goals for future is to get the last year's NCCYL Guidebook translated and distributed at the schools, because it's currently only distributed in English. But unfortunately, recruiting members into these programs requires English proficiency, like intermediate level.
Thank you, Bisham and Lorna. So yes, I think you've echoed a lot of the points that I've considered. One thing that is unique, I think, for most of our programs is we don't state a CLB level. In fact, I think we ask that participants self-identify with their level of how comfortable they are with the material that will be delivered. And I think that's quite empowering as well for participants to be able to make the choice to say, yes, I think I can do it. One thing that I did encounter with the participants in the leadership group was that they often were leaders in their cultural communities as well. So they would be bringing information back and forth between the groups that they spent a lot of time with socializing and what they learned in the group. So I hope that that was a more inclusive approach to the programming. So thank you, everybody. We've gone a little bit past time here. I don't see any new questions that are coming up on the chat right now. So I think we'll call that a wrap for the Q&A session. I did want to thank you very much for spending your time with us here and learning about how we've worked with newcomers to amplify their voices during the pandemic. And I would really encourage you to find a way to hold that megaphone to newcomers in your region and organization as well, so that their voices can come through loud and clear. So thank you everybody for coming today, and our thanks again to P2P, to Sonali and the communications team for enabling us to have this opportunity to share. And I hope that you also check out other workshops that have been shared, as well as upcoming in the virtual workshop series. So thank you very much, everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.